Our worthy forefathers, let's give them a cheer. To climates unknown did courageously steer. Through oceans to deserts for freedom they came, and dying bequeathed us their freedom and fame. In freedom we're born, and in freedom we live. Our purses are ready, steady, friends, steady. Not as slaves, but as free men, our money will give.
Welcome everyone, at home in Cable Land and wherever you're seeing us from today. My name is Doug Ulwick. I'm president of the Historical Society of Old Abington, and we're here today to tape, because of COVID, thank you, a special program for the Historical Society of Old Abington, and today's topic will be on the Spanish flu. I'm joined here by Marie Lailer, and I'm going to give you a better introduction in a few minutes, but we always start with a salute to the flag.
We shall do that.
So let's do that, and our cameraman will make sure that our microphones don't disconnect, I'm sure. But anyway, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I got it right this time. I've been having so much trouble with indivisible, I don't know what it is. So as I alluded to, this is part of a conversation series that we run. We do 3 in the fall, we call it the fall semester, and we do 3 in the spring. So we already have in the can, so to speak, 3 that we did in the fall. One of them was called The Business of Dying, which sounds kind of unusual, but the 3 towns that we work with, Abington, Rockland, and Whitman, each have funeral homes and historic buildings, and it seemed like a timely topic. So you can find that one on YouTube. We also did one on the GAR halls. All 3 towns had GAR halls. Rockland is the only one that's still very active, and we talked about all 3, but we actually went to Rockland and did a field trip. So that one's available also on YouTube as well, and it's rebroadcast occasionally on local cable. You can look for it there too. And then the third one we did in December was about the former Lutheran church in Abington. It was about to be sold. It has been sold to another church. So it's still a church, and we're very happy about that. But we interviewed a couple of important members of the church involved in the sale, and we took some looks through photographs of the building as it stood. And it was sold lock, stock, and barrel. Everything. The pew Bibles, the hymnals, the robes, everything went to the new entity that's in there now. So now we're embarking after a winter break on our spring series of conversations. And today we're talking about the Spanish flu, Deja vu all over again, question mark. In April, we're going to be doing one on policing in the old towns. All 3 towns have relatively new police stations, but how did they come about? Where were they first located? How did they change over the years? And what's modern day policing all about? So we'll look at that in April. Normally the first Sunday in April, but I think that's Easter, so we're probably taping the second Sunday. And then we'll round out the spring semester in May with a show and tell. The Historical Society of Old Abington and the Dyer Memorial Library and Archives are home to some amazing collections of items that have been donated over the years. And every year we get new stuff, all the time, and you guys don't get a chance to see it unless you come in and visit, and even then it's not necessarily on display. So every now and then we like to do a show and tell you what we got and the new stuff that's come in the door. So you have a better understanding of the resources here in this building through the 2 co-organizations that exist here. So that's fun. It's just a pure fun show to see what it is that we have. So we have today as a guest Marie Lailer. Now, Marie is the chair of the Trustees of the Dyer organization.
I am.
And she is a member of the Historic Commission in Whitman.
I'm a co-chair there.
Co-chair there, and you're also a nurse.
I'm a registered nurse.
So you're the perfect person to talk about all this stuff. and up until the taping time, Marie and I have been talking about pie-in-the-sky ideas for the building and for the organizations and things we can do. So I think this is also today the start of a momentous cooperation
I agree.
to get some serious things done around here. And we'll be inviting you, the public, to join us in those efforts because we can't do it alone.
We can't do it without you.
But anyway, so Marie, today I'm going to read a synopsis I pulled together for what
It's a good
I
one.
wanted us to talk about today. And in here it is, the Spanish flu synopsis. In 1918 to 1919, the world suffered from an international pandemic, an H1N1 flu, generally called the Spanish flu, although it did not originate in Spain. It came in 3 waves. It was transmitted through a super spreader event. And despite now familiar techniques to help stem the transmission, it ran rampant, infecting and killing huge segments of the population worldwide. There was no reliable means of diagnosis, there was no effective cure or treatment, and there was no vaccine. That's what happened. And this slide actually morphs into the artwork that came from it. Then as now, the most important thing in dealing with this was stopping the spread. And this looks really familiar from what they were
Doesn't
saying and the way they transmitted the information. They have an internet. This was from newspaper cartoons. But don't talk in my face, social distance. Don't shake hands, no physical contact. I love this, cough, sneeze, and spit into your... People must have spit a lot back then.
I guess so, because they did outlaw it at that point.
There you go. And stay home if you have a cold. In other words, you're not feeling well, stay home. Boy, this sounds familiar.
Doesn't it? Does.
It really does.
Now, in a medical terms, what you're looking at is, we didn't have a microscope to see.
Couldn't even see it. In fact,
It was absolutely.
They didn't see this till 1931.
So they had really no idea what it looked like.
Mm-hmm.
They were suspecting that close contact, coughing, sneezing being symptoms.
Spreading it.
Were all the spread.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, they knew they needed to stop the spread.
Mm-hmm.
What has happened now, I mean, going back to 1918, they didn't even have the antibiotics to combat the secondary infections, which was killing most of the people.
Right. The flu created the condition that created the illness that killed them.
Exactly.
And they had no way of curbing that.
Exactly.
So that was certainly the problem. But what also struck me was very different from then and now. The whole idea of outdoor, sleep with your windows open. This is actually from Brookline, Massachusetts, an outdoor camp. Now, recently we have seen auxiliary hospitals, field hospitals set up to deal with overflow. But this was that and then some. It was get outside.
Get outside. Well, they used that also during the TB sessions that we had. And they believed that it was a lack of vitamin D, a lot. They put a lot of
I'm still hearing that today, though.
They were putting a lot of these up on high hills.
For air?
For air, such as in Brookline.
Okay.
They felt that if you elevated the people up into the good air, it would be healthier for them.
Absolutely. Now, okay, Spanish flu. It didn't start in Spain.
No, it didn't.
That was politics. Now, I have read that it might have, the first cases recorded were like in Kansas. I mean, we should be calling it the American flu.
Right, except for we were going into the war at that point.
We were in the war.
So
World War I.
we have already brought all of our troops and called them in, and we've stationed them here. And we have to go fight over in Europe. We don't want to show any weakness. We don't want to admit that we are having a major epidemic going on here. So out in Kansas, the first couple of days were very minor. 4 guys showed up that had flu-like symptoms. Next day there were 18 of them. Next day there were 54 of them.
Yeah, there it was.
There it was. So now we put them in ships, in close quarters. We marched them, we drilled them.
Now, in theory, they weren't sick when they were doing it, and they had experienced the symptoms. They had the virus in their system.
Right.
But they weren't ill at that point.
Exactly.
They were carriers.
They were carriers.
Right.
So now you put them all in a big boat, and you ship them across to Europe. So should we have called it the American flu? Well, politics again, we don't want to admit that we were weak. So it was the Spanish press that came out because they were not on either side. Spanish press came out and said, well, there's this horrible flu that is taking over. And the United States said,
There it is.
there it is.
Well,
it's the
also,
Spanish flu.
but we had not just us, but I mean, much of Europe in the war had legislative news blocks.
Yes.
You couldn't
You
talk
could
about
not
it.
talk
but
about that.
Spain didn't have that same restriction
Right.
on press releases and news. So the only news that was coming back was from Spain.
Was from Spain.
So it was
Exactly.
convenient to, it's the Spanish flu, not saying that it's the Kansas flu.
Right.
But, so it really was amazing politics.
So here we go over into Europe.
Yeah.
And you have a slide showing.
Yeah, actually, as we
next-
go through, this is just another one showing masks. This is a group of nurses making masks. They weren't disposable. They were washable, but they were the old style that tied around your face.
Yep.
And production masks was huge. I heard there was a movement against mask wearing, and we've obviously seen that
We've
too,
seen that.
but less so. And I think that's another difference in attitude back there. We were gung-ho into World War I, so the flu was another enemy.
Right.
And
the
it was
country-
patriotic to fight the flu.
Exactly. It was very patriotic to do this. We are all working towards the war effort.
And to be healthy and to go fight
Exactly.
and everything else.
And we're going to pick up the ball and continue on
Right.
while we send these boys to war.
And now this is the first wave of the flu. There were three, and the first was, I've read the first was relatively mild. It was a flu virus. It was almost like what we deal with on a yearly basis here. And early on in our current pandemic, there was an attempt to paint COVID-19 as, it's just the flu
another
like we
version.
deal with on a regular
Yeah.
basis. But in each case, the word novel was applied. We had not seen an
We had not
H1N1 prior to the
Correct.
Spanish flu. We'll keep, for convenience, calling it the Spanish flu, not the Kansas flu. But, and COVID was the same thing. We hadn't seen it before, so our bodies had no resistance
Exactly.
to it. And,
Exactly.
and that's why it was able to take hold so strongly. But this shows, and it might, I'll give our cameraman some original artwork here that he can throw up to see this better, but it's showing that number one in the United States, and then number two in Europe, because that's where the war was being fought, and then number three brought it down in Africa, number four brought it over to China, and I think Japan as well, it's China there, and also into India and into Australia, and this was the first wave. But what I read happened, and again, we're seeing some of this now with COVID, it morphed, it changed. And
That is one of the things that they did not know
that it
back
could do,
then.
that it could even do it.
They couldn't see it, so they didn't really understand what was happening. So if you look at the cell and how it grows, it divides and it multiplies. And when it divides and multiplies, it can mutate.
It's not a perfect copy.
Exactly. And like any other being, it has the ability to adapt to its host, which is us. So here we have this new variant. They can't see it. They don't really know what it is.
They
think it's
can't even treat the symptoms.
They can't
take
treat
take
the
an aspirin.
They have no antibiotics. And off it goes.
And this diagram is the second wave. Now, the first wave settled off, but
did.
meanwhile, in Europe, it was getting bad, and it morphed out. So this one has number 1 in Europe, number 2 going back to the US, and even then going into South America from there. Number 3 back into Africa, 4 South Africa, and then across Russia, who were involved in the war as well, and from Moscow going down into the Arabian area and into India and again
Middle
into
East.
China and Japan. Australia was kind of saved from the second wave miraculously, but what I've read, and I'm sure you can elaborate on this in the second wave, was this was so intense you could in one day get it and fall dead from it. It created, there's a word, cytokine? Basically, it sounded like what we would call autoimmune.
Right.
In response.
It's a cytokine.
Cytokine,
T.
okay.
Yep.
And it in the lungs created fluid.
It did.
And so you were basically
did.
drowning. And I had read that you could be hemorrhaging from your mouth, your nose, your eyes, your ears, and just literally fall dead in the street. And unlike what we are seeing with COVID, where there's a ramping up period and you get worse and you hopefully get better, this one, you got it, and if you got it bad enough, you were dead.
It was very fast.
And very deadly.
And very deadly.
Yeah.
And of course, even if they got you into the hospital, they did not have.
What are they going to do with you?
What are they going to do?
Yeah,
They don't have the
yeah.
antibiotics. They don't know enough about it. All they know is that you're in here, you've got all the symptoms everybody else did, and they died.
And the other thing I've read about, particularly the second wave, but I think it applied to the whole Spanish flu, the age group it affected.
It mostly affected the 20 to 40-year-olds.
The healthy group people.
Healthy group of people.
And I read that was part because their immune system was good and it was going into hyperdrive and killing them.
Exactly.
But they referred to in one of the articles I saw about a W shape in terms of
Yes.
age, like at one age and then dropped, but the middle age,
It was
the healthy
middle,
20s.
The healthy 20s.
And pregnant women were dropping like flies.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then again, it went down and then back up again.
Then
So that
back
was the
up again.
W in terms of
Yes.
who it was hitting. And again, unchecked. Unchecked, absolutely unchecked.
There was nothing they could do.
Right, right. So I mean, that was a huge problem. I'm going to jump ahead to the third wave. I think we'll talk more about it. But strangely, of course, Australia had been spared in the second wave, but not in the third. But the third was in many ways more like the first. I mean, it wasn't as deadly. So again, it morphed. And it came back and it went through Europe next and then through the United States. An interesting thing I read was that President Woodrow Wilson was in Europe for the peace talks and he contracted it. So we had a president of the United States get it. And his personal doctor was concerned that it was an assassination attempt. It was not, but a conspiracy theory. Gee, where have we heard those before?
Never.
Never, not going to happen. But anyway, so that was it in terms of how it ran its course. But it ran its course over a couple of years. And then as now, they understood, as we alluded to earlier, that it spread through contact and not even necessarily physical contact of touching, though we saw you don't shake hands, you don't do anything else, you wash your hands. But they closed, I love this, this is the Quincy Patriot, Quincy Daily Ledger. From September 23rd, 1918, theaters and halls are closed. They did that. They closed schools, but not for long?
Not
now,
for
you
long.
did some of the research on the locals.
No, they did not close schools, maybe for a month.
Okay.
So nothing.
Right after they had opened them, I think,
Yeah.
as well. That was
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
we opened 2 weeks ago and now we're shutting.
Yeah. But as it had proceeded, they really had no idea what they were dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
So they went into hyper-protective mode. They shut the halls, they shut the schools, they advertised, they made sure everybody was aware that this was out there, it was deadly. You need to protect yourself.
Absolutely. Now, the super spreader for the Spanish flu was the World War. It was the coming and going of troops.
Of troops.
Up
back and
until
forth.
then, we hadn't seen mass movements of population.
Well, we didn't have the cars. We didn't have the
We
planes.
didn't have the ships even. I mean,
Yeah,
ships
we
were a
just-
luxury.
It did not exist. If we traveled, we went from here to Boston.
Boston, exactly. We both came up with the same word at the same time. They went to Boston. Speaking of which, another super spreader event, I love this one, 1918, the World Series. It was being played between Chicago and Boston, and it was ending up in Boston. I mean, look at the scene here. Do you see any masks? Look at the crowd here. You know, they still played it. And I have read one report, I love the theory, that the teams were paid by the games played. And there was talk that the Chicago Cubs might have thrown the second to last game so there would be a last game, thus carrying on further. And of course, the Red Sox won it. But nonetheless, I mean, we see what was going on here in Boston. This was a super spreader event in Boston for the second wave. This was still second wave. But anyway, but our... Contrasting it now, I think we've covered some of the bases for this one, but now jump ahead till 1 year ago, and things that changed. Transportation, the ability to transmit quickly around the globe an illness
Okay, so
that you can't see, you don't know you've got it till you've had it for a few days at least, maybe a week, and you can give it to someone else without knowing you had it to give. But how are people traveling?
Well, you took a shuttle into Boston, and you got on your airplane or your boat.
In a closed atmosphere,
in
in a
closed
tight cabin.
environment, in a tight cabin, you were gathered with a couple of hundred other people.
Oh, you were on a cruise ship.
Yes.
That
Lovely
was one
little
we saw
cruise
early
ships,
on.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you jump on your cruise ship and you are with the smaller ones have like 2,000 clients on at a time. You're all gathering in the theater, the bars, the centrums. You're coming and going from the dining rooms,
Restaurants. Dining rooms, yeah.
You are touching the railings of the ships.
Contact spread.
So contact spread, you're in close contact, you're breathing on other people, getting in and out of the ship, going through all the...
Now, I've read, and of course our understanding of COVID has evolved over the past year.
It has.
That, I mean, initially we had people washing groceries when they brought them home, but I have been reading that it really is aerosol, that it really is breathing the same air, not touching the same surface. I mean, you mentioned handrails, and I agree with you, but at the same time, it might be less of a factor than breathing the same air.
Right.
Okay.
So it is still believed that it's droplet contact. So I was sort of surprised early on. In being a nurse, we were always taught about the sanitation end of it. And we were taught about the bacteria spread. One of the episodes that I went through when I was first working in EMS was the HIV.
Oh, yeah. Another
epidemic.
virus. Yeah.
Here we have another virus that we know is coming through. We don't know a lot about it.
We know it's deadly.
We know it's deadly.
Yeah.
We don't quite know what we need to know about it. It's very insidious. So that was when we all started wearing gloves. Up until then, you didn't.
So contact spreading suddenly was being dealt with through latex.
Right. So all of a sudden we have contact spread. So now we are being very cautious about making sure that we have our gloves on.
Well, and that transferred over to sexual contact too with
Exactly.
condoms. It's like,
Exactly.
first line of defense for not spreading HIV was wear condoms.
Wear condoms.
So the same notion of introduce a barrier
Right.
between you and the virus.
But then as we've come along in our thinking, we've also taken the viruses and we've exposed them to the cold, we've exposed them to the heat, we've exposed them to sunlight, we've exposed them to drugs. And by doing all of that, we are narrowing down how can it be spread. How long does the virus actually live on a surface?
Right, yeah.
And that has a lot to do with whether it's a porous surface or a non-porous or...
Absolutely.
So
How long can it stay intact?
how long can it stay alive?
Right, absolutely. Now, along with that, it's interesting you brought up the HIV one because one of our key players in the national scene is Dr. Fauci, and it was actually the HIV virus in research that brought him
into viral
absolutely.
virology. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting that the lessons that he learned back then are being brought into play now.
Absolutely.
Again, so the man's got legs here.
Yeah, he does.
He really does.
He has definitely earned his rep.
His stripes.
And I just, there's a lot of politics going on out there.
And again, this disease has been more political. With Spanish flu, it was we're all in this together.
Yeah.
We're fighting a common enemy. The common enemy isn't just the Huns now. The common enemy is a virus among us that we can't see.
So it exists, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, right.
It's...
Do you believe in science or not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
in the end, science wins.
well, so everybody's listening to everybody else's little blurbs, and they're saying, oh, you have to watch CNN because they have the real truth.
Right.
No, watch NBC, they have the real truth.
Watch MSNBC.
Watch this one, watch that one. Oh no, don't use this as a reference. My reference has been CDC.
Center for Disease Control. Atlanta, isn't it?
Pardon me?
Are they based in Atlanta?
Yes.
I thought so, yeah.
And World Health Organization.
WHO. Absolutely.
Which in the middle of it, Trump pulls us out of.
Yeah, well, I mean, also we had a pandemic task force that was
Yes,
created
we
under
did.
Bush. Then the funding for that stopped. So as a nation, our marks have not been good.
No.
Because some of the defense mechanisms that we had built into the government were removed.
Exactly.
And then the notion of the credibility of science, which medicine is science, and medicine's what gets us through dealing with diseases. You got to believe the science in order to do it. Now, what you bring up also is a big difference from 1918, 1919. Communications, mass communications, social media, they didn't have that.
They didn't
They
have
had
that.
the Patriot Ledger.
That was their...
They had newspapers.
Yeah.
And that was kind of it. Radio even? Yeah, barely. They did, but I mean...
So it was spread
the media
by
was different.
newspaper.
Right.
Not everybody bought one.
Right.
That was a luxury. It was spread by word of mouth. Oh my gosh, did you read
Right.
the article in the newspaper about? So it has changed our way of looking at this. We now have not just one source of information coming into us, but we're being barraged
bombarded with
by...
it. And believe what you want. There's the other problem.
Now, and back in 1918, it is very patriotic to stand up for your country
And beat this enemy.
and beat it.
Yeah.
Now, the United States, the whole texture has changed. We believe that everybody should come in and be part of us, but people aren't as willing to accept the rules as they were given back then.
They don't want to make compromises, I think, if I want to generalize, because we just saw our biggest spike in COVID over what I've taken to calling the Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's foolishness.
Foolishness. Yes, it was.
Because everyone knows the right thing to do, but
And
but
it
it's suddenly,
didn't just-
but well, then we can't celebrate Christmas, or we can't, and but we're going to. And what happened? Our numbers spiked. You know, no big surprise.
No, it wasn't at all.
But, you know, and the other thing I noticed the state is doing, and again, this is through social media, they're posting weekly numbers. So you can see where your community is. And they were color coding. You could be in a red zone or a yellow zone or a green zone, or even get out of the zones, which was nice. But a lot of places over the holidays hit the red zone. Now, in terms, that brings me to local responses. In 1918, what did we have? We had the visiting nurse.
We did.
And
that was a huge thing, because the visiting nurses, up until then, you have to remember that a lot of our physicians, a lot of our nurses were sent to help the war effort.
Yeah. So who was left?
So who was left?
Yeah.
So it was basically this group of nurses that put together a group of women who they decided that they were going to teach to do basic health care. And so they were the ones that went out and disseminated the news and went house to house and checked on people.
Now, also, there were some local hospitals, field hospitals set up. I think Rockland, perhaps, I think it was the Spring Street facility, which had been a poorhouse and a pox house and everything else house, that they set up to accommodate. And I read Bridgewater had one too. But, I mean, we actually have here at the Dyer, it's an interesting resource from that period. Nurse Ellen McMullen has a transcript on file here dealing with the 1918 flu pandemic. And she talks about, you know, what happened back then and what their response was. But, and I just want to share a paragraph from it that I think is particularly relevant. This is on the Abington scene. But when the great flu epidemic struck in 1918, 47 persons died in the 4-month period of influenza and its attendant infection pneumonia. Surprisingly, 18 of the men were under 35. Thus, 38 of the 47 persons who died as a direct result of the epidemic were heads of young families who felt they could not quit work when the fever rose and their joints ached. Mothers and children who could not stay at home in bed mostly survived. The services of the visiting nurse who could come in to feed them and do the necessities for them helped them to stay in bed. The no contagious clause in her rules was waived. And then she talked about the epidemic in 2 waves. The schools were closed for several weeks, tried to open and closed again. The library was closed for 7 weeks. Almost every family in town was affected in greater or lesser degree by the flu. And as is pointed out here, how Miss McMullen avoided the disease is unknown. But one thing's for sure, she kept her hands away from her face and she washed and sterilized them constantly. But accounts like this that, you know, are in our own archives, and also we look at the town reports from them.
The Whitman Town Health Report.
Yeah.
There was one I was surprised that didn't mention it. Was it Abington or Rockland? Do you remember? Abington
didn't mention it at all.
Discuss
the
it
visiting
at all.
nurse had it in their report, but not the Board of Health. It didn't happen here. And Rockland talked about how they dealt with it, with that, and also I think one of their doctors had gotten sick very early on with it and was down and out with it. So, and that's a problem I saw this time. I have several doctor friends, and pretty much all of them have had it. You know, I know of one who didn't, but the first one I heard of was an ear, nose, and throat doctor. No surprise, he got it. But
we were digging.
Then had
exactly,
antibodies.
Right into the nasopharynx.
Right, exactly. But then he had antibodies, and everyone wanted his blood. So, but it was interesting to know that the medically trained people who are so trained aren't immune to getting it.
No, they're not.
And there are frontline workers, and they're still getting it. Now,
quite a few of my friends who are nurses, and I was an emergency department nurse, so many of my friends contracted it. I also worked in EMS services. And again, paramedics, EMTs, not dropping like flies, but they were sick.
But
they were sick.
In this case, this is more hitting in terms of fatalities, the elderly population
It
more
is.
than this
It is.
younger, healthier ones who can seem to throw it off, but they can transmit it.
I mean, the good news that as we see the deaths come down, a lot of it has been a learning curve on the medical field.
I still wish we could have learned more from 1918.
Yeah, I do too.
That's why we're talking about it now.
But actually, that's when they started to go back and do. People say, "Oh, this is a brand new vaccine. It's just started. It's way too new. I don't want to go there." And I say, "Yeah, this vaccine was just brought out, but the studies had started."
Right.
Way back in the 1940s. As soon as we were able to have a microscope that could see these, we started to say, why was this happening?
Right.
How can we fix it? What's going on? Why is this so insidious? And a lot of that was because it's mutating. Like anything else, we adapt to our environment.
But that also explains because by the time the swine flu pandemic came through later, we were doing vaccines.
Yes,
But
exactly.
those change annually because of the anticipated morphing.
Right,
Okay,
exactly.
Okay. But yet again, we refer to COVID as a novel.
Novel.
Because it ain't like anything we've seen before, and we don't have we didn't have
We didn't have the vaccine.
But
So they
boy,
had
did we
been-
get one in record time.
They had been working on this for many, many years. And they thought that this was a really good way to get into the genetic makeup of the virus itself,
RNA messenger.
the RNA messenger, and stop it from replicating.
Now, do you think that's going to change our, I think a lot of things are coming out of how we deal with COVID-19, socially, economically, medically. Do you think it's going to change our flu vaccines from now on? Because they haven't been dealing with the RNA messenger. Now we are.
Now we are.
And I mean, I'm thinking our flu
definitely
vaccines
they-
are going to be
I think they are, yeah.
like on steroids.
Yeah.
I mean, suddenly the flu vaccines are going to get really good.
I think the messenger RNA technique, they're hitting it sort of lower. They're hitting it below the belt. They're hitting it before it replicates.
Now, I'm also fearful here that we might be losing our audience just a little bit as we're talking about RNA messengers. I've done reading, so I kind of know what we're talking about.
Okay.
But basically, the body's ability to replicate, we hear about DNA all the time because it's used in court cases because it's unique.
That is our own body's identification
Fingerprints,
system.
but RNA is similar.
It is.
And it's a way of replicating within the body, and it's a way of keeping our bodies refreshed with the appropriate cells.
With the appropriate immunizations and with the appropriate immunotechnology.
Okay. And so hitting that,
We're hitting
which
it.
we never did before.
We're hitting it where the antibodies begin.
Right.
Instead of giving us a small amount of live vaccine
And expecting our
or
bodies
to create it, they're hitting it before it starts replicating.
So this is our hope for, if I dare say we've had 2 waves. We had the initial.
I definitely think so.
I don't know if we've had 3.
I don't know, but
Yeah.
I'm not ready to jump out there yet and
I
say,
suppose we don't have the luxury of looking back at it yet.
Yeah.
We're still in it. But with the vaccines coming out now, getting enough people immunized, the hope, as I understand it, and I think we talked about this a little on our own earlier, is that as it is morphing, and it is, and we've already identified some of the morphs, the quicker we can get the vaccines in arms so you don't get it in the first place, the better chance you have of not allowing the other morphed versions to take hold.
Get in. Exactly.
To take hold. So this is the rush, if only we could make the vaccines faster, which is the frustration.
Exactly, which is the big frustration.
But suddenly, this didn't happen in 1918. They never got a vaccine. They never got a cure. And what I've read is basically, it died out because if you were going to get it, you got it. And if you were going to die from it, you died. And is that herd immunity? Is that what herd immunity is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, you pass it on from person to person. Your body jumps in there and makes the antibodies that you need to stop it from replicating.
I read with the Spanish flu, I read that 35% of the world's population got it.
Yes.
And again, either survived it or died from it, but it hit that much. Thank you, World War I.
Yeah, it was.
Of course, if it wasn't that, it would have been something else. But,
yeah, there'd be another super spreader.
Exactly, but that was our super spreader, and now we've had super spreader events, but the big super spreader is our mobility. Yeah. It really is. It's our ability to get from here to there very quickly and not know what we're bringing with us.
No, we don't.
And it's a problem moving forward. So I think, as I alluded to, I think we forgot a lot of 1918 because there's just no one left who really lived through it. I mean, there are people who were born in 1918, but not with an awareness of what the world was going through. And so the hindsight we're getting is through what we're doing, talking about what happened, researching what happened, spreading the information. But we have to learn moving forward.
And I think that's what history is all about.
Yeah.
Is acknowledging what happened and learning from it. I get concerned sometimes when I see them pulling down statues and pulling down things that have meant something to the people of the area, and all of a sudden this person shouldn't have a statue because they had slaves, and this person shouldn't have a statue because they were racist.
Bad.
They were bad.
They were bad.
They were bad.
And I hear what you're saying. I see both sides of it.
I do see both sides.
On one hand, you want to acknowledge history. On the other hand, you don't want to glorify something that was bad. So are you seeing that icon as representing something that's bad or acknowledging history?
Exactly.
And that's the line we seem to be treading.
There we are. So if you take that history that has been out there and bring it forward and say, in 1918, we didn't have all of the technology. They weren't doing the x-rays. The medical community, when it first started, people were coming in and we were like, oh my God, what is this?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, they're in this massive wet lung condition, and if we intubate them and put them on machines and breathe for them, the blood is clotting, and all of these things are happening. So the medical community started to look at it and go, okay, so we'll be careful about this, and we'll add blood thinners, and we'll move this way, and we won't be so anxious to put people on the ventilators. And our care for these patients evolved into what we're doing today.
Which is giving everyone a better chance of surviving.
Exactly.
But it comes back to that word novel. If you haven't dealt with it before, everything's an experiment. It really is.
Well, think about going back through history, the bubonic plague, any of the plagues, Black Death, any of those.
Any illness that
spread. I mean, the governments back then were using it.
Oh yeah, but I think I'm happy to be alive today, living where we have the medical technology to do what we're doing. I mean, and we are. I want to get cocky about it, but we're 1 year out, and we understand it better than they ever did. And I'm not going to say we have treatments for it. We can still only treat the symptoms.
We can only treat the symptoms.
But now we have a vaccine, 3 vaccines, at least 3 in this country.
Yep.
I think there's still even more overseas that have an effectiveness, even the least effective, dare I say. They're guaranteeing you're 100% safe from not going to the hospital and not dying. I mean, and let's face it, that's kind of the goal.
Yeah.
So even if you're going to shop for vaccines based upon the efficiency, even the least of them is going to keep you here.
Better than
it's going to keep you
nothing.
Here. Exactly. So anyway.
No, it's not going to change your DNA.
We're not planting tracer cells in you. There's no microchip in there.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't make them quite that small. I've seen the needles.
I really feel that it is important at this point to be vaccinated. I think there are so many, through the years, we've done vaccines for so many things, and there may have been side effects. There may have been other things that it caused. But it's the risk versus the outcome.
Oh, absolutely. And what I'm also, in spite of all the social media hoo-ha about all of this, and I kind of laughed because the same day I ended up getting my first inoculation, there was someone from Abington who I knew who got his inoculation. He and his wife got their inoculations. And I knew that he was a doubter from the start. Oh, this is just all made up and everything. The first day he was eligible to get the inoculation, he got it. He got it. And I'm thrilled. I'm not poking fun at it. It's just a little irony for me. But the fact that I thought, good. And as frustrating as it is for everyone who wants to get the inoculation, and oh my God, I can't get it. There's no room. They ran out. They don't have enough. I can't get an appointment. The fact that they want to. The fact that this is important to them, that they're looking out for their health and the health of their loved ones and the health of their neighbors is great. I mean, so the downside of social media that led to all the doubt and all of the controversy and the spreading of it, because people who weren't believing it, and already we have states lifting mask mandates. Who, I mean, the president and the doctors are saying,
not yet.
It's too soon. But so, I mean, we're still dealing with that. But at least what I see locally, and I think it's indicative of much of the rest of the country, is people desperately want this.
I do too.
And that's a good thing.
We want to return to normal.
Whatever that means. And it will never be.
And I don't know. I mean, what they said back in 1918 was, maintain some distance. Wash your hands frequently. Keep your hands away from your face. And wear a mask.
No,
I don't know that those aren't bad recommendations.
Well, I think
100 years later.
There are Asian cultures who seem to wear masks a lot. We don't do it. Honestly, I'm tempted now in flu season to do it myself.
I know. I think that might be breaking a little bit of a barrier. If you saw somebody around here running around with a mask, I mean, I saw it at the hospitals because they were because they were immunocompromised.
Right.
But they were protecting themselves. I've always seen myself wearing a mask because I don't want to infect others.
Absolutely.
It's, to me, I would feel horrible if I ever was in contact with somebody and a couple of days later they came down.
Oh, yeah, that it could be it. I mean, I was at an event that was supposed to be safe with family members and limited family members, and people have been tested. And 3 days after the event, I got a phone call that one of the members who was there was just diagnosed. They went to an event afterwards, so I was okay. But nonetheless, it did that. And you talk about wearing masks. I'm actually planning on wearing something different. We're getting these immunization cards, of course, that say when you got your shot, where you got your shot, what shot you got, and in most cases, not Johnson & Johnson, but the others, there are 2 to be filled out. I'm laminating mine onto a lanyard, and I love it. I'm going to be wearing it. And I have friends, I've told them, will you do mine? And I will. I just ordered up like 100 of the laminating pouches, pieces. And I'm going to wear it. I mean, first, advertising that I believe in it, and second, that
I think that's a great
I'm as safe as I can be.
But my thoughts is that in our travels now, that is going to start to be part of
I think so.
The rules.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that we will have to prove
that we have been immunized. So we don't become super spreaders.
Exactly.
So anyway, they didn't do that in 1918.
Nope, they didn't.
Well, anyway, I think we're going to wrap up. Anything that we've missed that we should share with our audience? Wash your hands.
Wash your hands. That is not. I used to give a bacteriology talk for my EMS students. And every time I went over it, and bloodborne pathogens, I would go, oh, what am I even in this field for. The bugs, oh my gosh.
Ick.
But you get into a habit as a nurse. You go into a room, you wash your hands, you dry your hands, you talk to your patient, you examine your patient.
It's your routine.
You wash your hands.
It's your routine.
It gets into a routine.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm very conscious. I used to be a nail biter. Back many 50, 60 years ago, I was a nail biter. And somebody challenged me to stop biting my nails, which I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a big deal about people putting their fingers in their mouths.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I can't be sure that this COVID droplet thing does not live on surfaces for a period of time afterwards.
Okay.
So I'm not going to risk it.
Right.
I'm not going to be touching things and putting my hands into my face,
Right.
into prime real estate.
Mm-hmm.
You wash your hands, you use your mask, you use your hand sanitizer. We will at some point come up to herd immunity.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And also, with the introduction of vaccine, even if we don't do herd immunity, we're going to otherwise fight it
Right.
and see the numbers drop. Numbers
So-
have dropped below 2%
I
at this
know.
point, and we're hoping they keep coming down so we can all
And
sleep at night.
when we are now starting to level out a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, we also need not to let up on our practices.
Right.
Those practices need to continue.
Because they work.
Because they do work.
They work. And that's the most basic thing we can take away from
There's
any
the
of
bottom
this.
line.
So as we're looking at 1918 and looking at 2020 and 2021, there were some basic wisdoms that got them through as best as they could. We are blessed with better technologies, with better medicine, but some of the same things that kept some of them healthy, 35% of them got it, but some of the same things that got them through will get and indeed are getting us through as well. I feel fortunate to, again, a year later, knock on something, I remain healthy. And I personally have had my first vaccine. I'll have my second in about another week. And I'm looking forward to having a 94% immunity, which would be nice. But lessons learned, and lessons continue to be learned, and lessons for the future. I mean, we go through a flu season every year. This year's was mild because more people got inoculated and more people were wearing masks.
They were washing their hands. They were staying
So it
away
works
from
no matter
people.
what. It works no matter. It gets us through the flu seasons, even if it's not novel. It gets us through.
What does, going back and thinking about it, I mean, as a nurse, you never wanted to call out of work.
No.
Because you didn't feel good.
Right.
Because you were hurting, you were always told you were hurting your coworkers.
Yeah, well, true, I suppose, but yeah.
On the other hand,
You didn't want to spread anything.
you didn't want to spread it either.
You had the responsibility to your patients and your coworkers as well.
So it absolutely.
Well, anyway.
Don't
so,
let your guard down, people. Not yet.
So this is fascinating timing to be doing this. Again, we're kind of 1 year in, and we have some perspective on it, but as Marie pointed, we don't know second wave, third wave, whatever that we're dealing with until we have a little more historic perspective. But this has been our historic perspective today, looking 100 years back and looking at now, and talking about the deja vu all over again. And we thank you for joining us today. Marie, thank you. It's been delightful.
Thank you, it has been.
And I enjoyed your knowledge and enjoyed the conversation
you.
back and forth.
We've had a lot of fun.
We're not supposed to, but we did. Anyway, so until next time, folks, and you can catch most of probably all of our programs on YouTube and on local cable. The next one we will be taping is on the police stations and the police force in the towns of Abington, Rockland, and Whitman over the years. And I'm not sure who our guest will be yet. I have a few people in mind, but be looking for that in about a month's time. And we're looking forward to being back with you again. In the meantime, stay healthy. Wash your hands, wear your masks, keep socially distanced. Did I leave any out?
Nope.
Okay,
Perfect.
we're there. Anyway, thank you, and thank you for joining us.